After my wife died, I felt so lost. I asked my son if I could visit more often just to feel less alone. He said, "You've got to stop guilt-tripping me. I have a life." I bought a puppy the next day and started a YouTube channel about grieving and healing. That channel now has over 200,000 followers, and not one of them makes me feel like a burden. My name is Arthur, though these days a surprising number of people know me as George's dad online. But that comes later. This story starts with Eleanor, my Eleanor. For 52 years, she was the sun I orbited, the steady beat in the rhythm of my days. When ovarian cancer took her from me 8 months ago, the world didn't just lose its light. It lost its sound, its scent, its very meaning. I was adrift in a sea of her absence, the silence in our little house a deafening roar. The mornings were the worst. I'd reach for her side of the bed, only to find the cold, empty expanse of sheets. Her reading glasses still sat on the nightstand. Her favorite cardigan was still draped over the armchair in the living room. Each object was a tiny, sharp arrow to the heart. I tried to maintain routines. Coffee at 7, a walk in the park, reading the paper. But it all felt like going through the motions of a life that no longer belonged to me. The loneliness was a physical ache, a constant companion. My son, Daniel, lives about an hour away. He's a busy architect, married to a lovely woman, Sarah, and they have 2 wonderful teenagers, my grandchildren, Lily and Tom. In the raw, early days of grief, they were there. They helped with the funeral arrangements, brought over casseroles, offered well-meaning but ultimately hollow condolences. Then, as it must, their own lives reclaimed them. The visits grew less frequent, the calls shorter. I understood. They had their own orbits, their own suns. But the gravitational pull of my loneliness was becoming unbearable. One Tuesday, after a particularly bleak morning spent staring at Eleanor's untouched gardening gloves, I called him. "Daniel." "Hi, it's Dad," I said, trying to sound casual, not like the drowning man I felt. "Hey, Dad, everything okay?" His voice was a little distracted, the familiar sound of keyboard clicks in the background. "Oh yes, fine. I lied. Just, it's quiet here. Very quiet. I was wondering, would it be too much trouble if I came over for dinner one night this week? Or maybe just pop by for an hour or 2 on Saturday? Just to see you all. Feel a bit less like a ghost." A sigh came down the line, a small, weary exhalation that spoke volumes. "Dad," he began, and I braced myself. "We've been over this. Sarah and I are swamped at work. Lily has her exams, Tom has his football tournaments. Our weekends are packed. You know how it is." I do, I said quickly. "I just thought, even for a little while, you've got to stop guilt-tripping me, Dad," he said, his voice hardening, losing its patient edge. "I have a life. We have a life. I'm sorry you're lonely. I really am. But you need to find ways to manage. You can't keep relying on us to fill the gap." Guilt-tripping. The accusation stung, sharp and unexpected. I hadn't meant to guilt-trip. I'd meant to reach out, to ask for a lifeline. But he saw it as a demand, an imposition. I have a life. The unspoken corollary hung in the air. And you, Dad, apparently do not. "I understand, Daniel," I said, my voice hollow. "You're right. I'm sorry to have bothered you." I hung up the phone, the silence in the kitchen pressing in on me heavier than before. His words echoed. Manage. Stop relying on us. He was right, of course. I was a grown man. I couldn't expect my son to pause his life because mine felt like it had ended. But the rawness of his dismissal, the implication that my need for connection was a burden, cut deeper than the grief itself. The next morning, I woke with a peculiar sense of clarity. If I was a burden to my own son, then I would find a way to carry myself. If my old life was over, then perhaps it was time to start a new one, however small, however faltering. And I knew, with a certainty that surprised me, what the first step would be. Eleanor and I had always talked about getting another dog after our old golden retriever Max passed away years ago. When things slow down, we'd always said. Well, things had certainly slowed down for me. That afternoon, I drove to the local animal shelter. I walked past cages of barking, hopeful dogs, my heart aching with a strange mix of sorrow and anticipation. And then I saw him. A small, scruffy terrier mix with oversized ears, a perpetually worried expression, and a tail that thumped a frantic rhythm against the cage floor when I approached. The volunteer told me his name was Scrappy, found wandering alone by the highway. I sat on the floor of the visiting enclosure, and he crawled into my lap, burying his head under my chin, trembling slightly. He wasn't a replacement for Eleanor. He wasn't even a replacement for Max. He was just a fellow lost soul. "Well, Scrappy," I whispered, my voice thick. "It seems we both need a friend." I renamed him George, after my own father. It felt solid, dependable. The first few weeks with George were chaos. Chewed slippers, puddles on the kitchen floor, sleepless nights punctuated by his whimpering. But amidst the mayhem, something shifted within me. George needed me. He needed walks, food, play, reassurance. His presence filled the house not just with yips and the click-clack of his nails on the floorboards, but with a vibrant, demanding life force. The silence was no longer absolute. The loneliness, while still present, had a warm, furry, four-legged distraction. I started taking photos and short videos of him with my old smartphone, his clumsy attempts to catch a ball, his contented sighs as he slept at the foot of my bed, his delighted barks when I came home from an errand. Watching them back one evening, a thought flickered. Maybe other people felt this way. Maybe other people were navigating this same bewildering landscape of grief and the search for new beginnings. The idea of a YouTube channel was preposterous. I was a retired man who barely knew how to send an email attachment. But the thought, once planted, began to grow. I wasn't looking for fame or fortune. I was looking for connection, the very thing my son had told me I couldn't rely on him for. I spent a week watching tutorials, how to create a channel, how to upload a video. Basic editing, an oxymoron if ever there was one for a man of my technical prowess. I called the channel A Gentleman and a George, a little nod to my new companion and my old-fashioned sensibilities. My first video was terrible. The lighting was bad, the sound was tinny, and I rambled. I talked about Eleanor, about the gaping hole she'd left. I talked about the call with Daniel, though I didn't name him, just the feeling of being a burden. And then I introduced George, who promptly tried to eat the microphone. I uploaded it with a thumping heart, convinced no one would watch, or worse, that people would leave cruel comments. But a few days later, a comment appeared. Then another. "Thank you for sharing. I lost my husband last year. It's so hard." And another. "George is adorable. My dog saved me after my mom passed." Slowly, tentatively, people started to subscribe. 10, then 50, then 100. They weren't just watching videos of a cute puppy. They were responding to the honesty, the vulnerability. They were sharing their own stories of loss, of finding solace in unexpected places, of the quiet courage it takes to keep putting one foot in front of the other when your world has crumbled. Hadn't told Daniel about George, or about the channel. What was the point? He had his life. I was, as he'd advised, managing. I was finding my own way. And for the first time since Eleanor died, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't dared to hope for. A sense of purpose and a connection to a world that didn't see me as a guilt trip, but as a fellow traveler on a difficult road. My small online community was growing, and with it, so was I. The first few months of A Gentleman and a George were a gentle learning curve. I slowly got the hang of propping my phone against a stack of books for a steady shot, of speaking clearly, though George often tried to upstage me with a well-timed bark or sigh, and even of figuring out how to add a little title card at the beginning of each video. My content wasn't fancy. It was just me, talking. I'd film our walks with George through the local park. Here in Beni Malal, the olive groves in the distance and the calls of the street vendors sometimes made their way into the audio, adding an unexpected, rustic charm. I'd share memories of Eleanor, sometimes laughing, sometimes with tears welling in my eyes. I showed George's progress with sit and stay, mostly failures in the early days, and I'd read out kind comments from my small but growing audience. That audience was the miracle. They came from all over the world, widows and widowers, people estranged from their families, animal lovers, those simply feeling adrift. They found solace in my ramblings, in George's antics. The comments section became a sanctuary, a place of shared vulnerability and mutual support. Arthur, your words about missing Eleanor's laughter made me weep. I lost my John 2 years ago, and it's the little things, isn't it? One wrote, George is a testament to how much love a rescue dog can bring. You saved each other, said another. I wasn't just talking into the void anymore. I was part of a conversation, a community woven together by shared human experience. My days found a new rhythm. Morning walk with George, filming snippets along the way. Breakfast, then an hour or two responding to comments, planning the next. Video. Afternoons were for errands, more walks, and sometimes just sitting in the sun with George at my feet, feeling a quiet contentment I hadn't thought possible. The grief for Eleanor was still there, a part of my fabric now, but it was no longer a suffocating shroud. It was more like a soft, familiar cloak, heavy at times, but also a reminder of the immense love that had shaped my life. The channel grew, organically. Someone would share a video, then someone else. I hit 10,000 subscribers, then 50, then 100,000. I remember staring at that number, 100,000, with utter disbelief. I baked a special liver cake for George to celebrate, and we shared it on camera. My audience loved it. They weren't just viewers, they felt like friends. They celebrated my small victories, offered comfort on my blue days, and showered George with virtual affection. The day the subscriber count ticked over 200,000, I was sitting on my little balcony, George snoozing in a patch of sun. My phone pinged with the notification, 200,000 souls. I thought of Daniel's words. You've got to stop guilt-tripping me. I have a life. And I looked at the number on my screen. It seemed I had a life too, a rather unexpectedly public and fulfilling one. Not one of these 200,000 people had ever made me feel like a burden. They had, in fact, done the opposite. They had lifted me. I never told Daniel about the channel, or about George for that matter. Our calls, which became even less frequent, were stilted. I'd ask about Lily and Tom. He'd ask if I was managing okay. I'd say I was fine, keeping busy. He never pressed for details. There was a polite, carefully constructed wall between us. I think he felt he'd set a boundary, and I was respecting it. In truth, I had simply found another path. It was Lily, my bright, tech-savvy granddaughter, who eventually bridged the gap. She called me one afternoon, her voice a mixture of excitement and confusion. Grandpa, are you Arthur Pendleton from A Gentleman and a George on YouTube? My heart skipped a beat. Well, hello, Lily dear. Yes, I suppose I am. Oh my gosh, Tom and I found your channel last night. We were looking for cute dog videos, and there was George. And then we saw you. Grandpa, George is adorable. And your videos, some of my friends watch you too. They said you're like the internet's grandpa. Why didn't you tell us? I chuckled. It just sort of happened, sweetheart. It was my little project. Later that week, Daniel called. His voice was different, strained. Dad, Lily told me about your YouTube channel. Ah, I said, waiting. I watched a few of the videos, he continued. The one where you talk about Mom, and the one where you talked about feeling lonely after our call. He paused, and I could hear him swallow. Dad, I had no idea you were feeling that way. Not to that extent. And I certainly didn't know about George. Well, you had your life, Daniel, I said, not unkindly, just stating a fact he himself had made clear. I needed to find a way to have mine. 200,000 followers, Dad? He said, a note of incredulity in his voice. That's a lot of people. They're good people, I said, a kind community. There was no grand apology from him, not then. But something had shifted. The wall was still there, but a small window had been opened. He started calling a little more often. The calls were still sometimes awkward, but he'd ask about George, about the channel. He'd mention that Lily and Tom had watched my latest video. He was trying, in his own way, to understand this new version of his father, the one who wasn't just a grieving widower, but a man with a voice, a purpose, and a very popular terrier mix. I still miss Eleanor every single day. That will never change. But I am no longer lost. George, with his boundless enthusiasm and unconditional love, anchors me to the present. And my online community, those 200,000 souls, they remind me that even in the depths of grief, connection is possible, that sharing one's authentic self can be a beacon for others. I am not a burden. I am Arthur, George's dad, a storyteller, a fellow traveler. And my life, it turns out, is far from over. It's just found a wonderfully unexpected new leash.